Welcome, insomniacs and thrill seekers, to your new nightmare. Do you ever feel a prickle on the back of your neck? A sense that something unseen watches you from the shadows? Do you hear whispers in the dead of night? Whispers that promise chilling secrets? We all have those moments, those times when the veil between reality and the terrifying unknown seems paper thin. Here, on this channel, we delve into those moments, those unsettling stories that lurk just beneath the surface. We'll explore the darkness that lives in abandoned asylums, the malevolent entities that haunt ancient forests, and the bone-chilling encounters that plague everyday lives. So, gather close, light a candle if you dare, because tonight, we're going to make you afraid of everything.
Heather scowled, her eyes glued to the well-worn paperback. Parties? Not a chance. Texting? Pass. Makeup? Ditto. Pretty enough, she muttered, a flicker of doubt crossing her mind despite the constant reassurances. Maybe that's why her friends, a motley crew of interesting souls, tolerated her sharp tongue. A shiver ran down her spine as the clock ticked toward the witching hour, Halloween night. The shrill ring of her phone shattered the quiet. Groaning, she recognized the caller ID, Mark, the self-proclaimed social butterfly of the group. He was the one who herded them, made plans, the unofficial leader, even if he denied it. Yeah, she answered, a bite in her voice. Introverts like Heather craved solitude, and phone calls were the bane of her existence. Texts or face-to-face interactions were far more tolerable. Mark, bless his persistent heart, knew this yet persisted in calling. Trying to get under my skin again, Mark, she grumbled. That infuriatingly calm voice, did the guy ever lose his cool? She tried everything to keep him at bay initially, but his relentless positivity had worn her down. A begrudging friendship had formed, and Heather couldn't deny her life had become more vibrant with him around. Though admitting that? Never. Halloween, huh? Can't a girl get some peace around here? Heather muttered with a frown. Mark's voice crackled through the phone. Nope, he chirped, but it's way more fun with your sarcastic wit along for the ride. Who else will keep Kelsey grounded and John in check? Heather rolled her eyes, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. Alone time was her jam, but this little friend group had grown on her. Don't worry, I have a killer night planned. Remember your love for spooky reads? Tonight's your night. He wasn't wrong. In theory, this should be her ideal night. But crowds and forced interactions? No thanks. Still, Heather sighed, a low rumble in her chest. Fine, she conceded, I'll be waiting. Excitement crackled in Mark's voice. Awesome. See you in 30. Heather figured their hangout was on their route. Perfect. Earlier, she'd chosen her costume, Valak from The Nun. A quick shower, some clothes wrangling, and a dash of makeup later, she was transformed into the chilling villain from Conjuring 2. It wasn't elaborate, just enough to shroud her face in anonymity. Not that anyone would recognize her anyway, but a little extra mystery never hurt. The doorbell chimed, startling her as she perfected the final touches. The doorbell's shrill cry echoed through the house. Heather, your freak show of friends is here, her dad boomed from downstairs. Heather smirked, adding the final touches to her Valak makeup. Coming, she called back. Downstairs, her dad's jaw dropped. What in the... He sputtered, staring at her full costume. Heather chuckled, used to his dramatics. Nice costume, honey, her mom offered with a playful nudge. Calm down, Gary, it's Halloween. You know she lives for this horror stuff. Her dad sighed, muttering something about needing a stronger drink. Have a good time, pumpkin, he mumbled, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Heather understood his discomfort. They were Catholic after all, and her dad wore his faith on his sleeve. See you later, Dad, she chirped, offering a quick hug. The front door opened to reveal Mark, a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. Before him stood Heather's dad, radiating disapproval. Bring her back in one piece, Mark, he boomed, his voice laced with mock seriousness. She's our only child, you know? Heather rolled her eyes at her dad's usual routine of trying to intimidate Mark. John and Kelvin snickered from behind Mark. Stepping outside, Heather greeted them with a flat, "Hey." John, ever the charmer, quipped, "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence." Debbie Downer strikes again. Heather shot back a witty retort, "Better a downer than a jerk, wouldn't you say?" It was a familiar dance, their playful insults. Despite their differences, they'd formed a bond, an oddball family of sorts. Heather suspected it was Mark's doing. He possessed an uncanny ability to connect with anyone as long as they weren't complete duds. "Whoa, nice costume, Heather." Kelvin offered, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Heather appreciated his easygoing nature. He never took her barbs personally, making him a comfortable friend to be around. Sure, he lacked ambition, but Heather wasn't exactly Miss Career Woman herself. At least she had started thinking about the future, thanks in no small part to Mark's influence. John, ever the instigator, barked a playful insult at Kelvin, who simply shrugged it off. "Enough, you two," Kelsey chimed in, his voice a steady drone. Despite Heather's superficial streak, she valued Kelsey's kindness and loyalty. He and Mark were practically joined at the hip, the longest-standing members of their little group. Heather liked to tease Mark about secretly dating Kelsey, but he always shot it down. Mark, ever the leader, rallied the group. "All right, everyone, let's move out." "Where to?" John questioned. A mischievous glint flickered in Mark's eyes. "Surprise," he declared, "but trust me, it'll be spooky." Their trek led them to a familiar sight, the abandoned haunted house on the outskirts of town. Whispers of disturbing incidents had turned it from a Halloween attraction into a local pariah. Rumors even swirled about missing teenagers, though nothing concrete had ever surfaced. Heather's parents, naturally wary with their strong spiritual beliefs, had warned her off the place. Ironically, its location near their house made it more convenient than for the others. A hesitant question escaped Heather's lips. "Wait, Mark, is this?" He confirmed her suspicion with a confident nod. "We're going to check it out for ourselves. Parents love to scare us kids, right? Mine never even brought me here." Besides, he added excitedly, "they're closed for good now, but haven't hauled everything away yet. Perfect chance for a peek." John wasn't entirely convinced. "Maybe there's a reason for that missing kid story," he mumbled. Kelsey, ever the voice of reason, interjected, "Allegedly missing. Nothing ever came of it." Heather found herself grappling with a strange concern. "Ugh, are we really worried about cobwebs in my hair right now?" she thought, shaking her head. This was the legendary haunted house, and they were going in on Halloween night. Talk about a story for the ages. Kelvin, ever the wild card, chimed in, "Maybe we can find the missing kid and give his family closure." His deadpan delivery made it hard to tell if he was serious. Heather wasn't sure about the whole plan. A tremor of doubt ran through her. Maybe entering the house wasn't the brightest idea. But then again, wasn't facing her fear the whole point? Perhaps a peek inside would demystify the place, revealing just Halloween theatrics. Mark, sensing her hesitation, cut in, "Heather, trust me?" John, the resident contrarian, groaned, "Oh brother, here we go with the hero speech." He was the only one, besides Heather, voicing reservations. Heather nodded, her voice firm. "Yeah, I do." There was no denying her trust in Mark. "Then believe me," Mark continued, his voice earnest, "there's nothing truly scary in there. Sure, it's creepy and atmospheric, but that's just the spooky stories playing tricks on our minds and the design meant to scare. Aren't you at least a little curious? Wouldn't it be awesome to debunk the rumors and see it for what it really is?" He had a way with words, a genuine conviction that was infectious. John even seemed to waver. "Damn," he muttered. Mark was their planner, the one they trusted. Why break the pattern now? Heather sighed. "All right, let's do it." A wave of relief washed over Mark and Kelsey. They exchanged a triumphant high five. "Great. Here's the plan," Mark announced, his voice brimming with excitement. "We'll sneak in through the back. I managed to jimmy open the gate, and there's a clear path leading to the house." "Sound good?" A chorus of cool echoed in response. Unfamiliar thrills coursed through Heather's veins, a stark contrast to her usual routine. Tonight felt different, and a delicious premonition whispered that it would be unforgettable. The moment they entered the compound, a heavy silence settled over them. An oppressive atmosphere hung in the air, prickling Heather's skin with unease. A primal urge to flee tugged at her, and judging by her friends' stiff postures, they weren't immune either. But seeing Mark press forward, a determined glint in his eyes gave her a flicker of courage. "Well, past the point of no return now," John muttered, attempting a playful lilt to his voice that didn't quite mask the underlying tension. He even threw in a spooky ghost impression, earning an eye roll from Heather. They squeezed through an unlocked window, the act itself a transgression into the forbidden. The air inside felt different, charged with an unseen energy. A shiver ran down Heather's spine. Was this place truly haunted? Or was it simply her imagination, fueled by the creepy atmosphere? Anyone else feel a shift in the air? Kelvin asked, his voice barely a whisper. Nervous glances exchanged between them confirmed they all shared the unsettling sensation. Heather, trying to sound braver than she felt, suggested maybe we should just head back now, but the response was a chorus of skeptical looks. Mark, ever the leader, took charge. "All right, let's explore the main hall first, then work our way outwards. And stay together, no wandering off." John scoffed. Mr. Fearless himself seems to be having second thoughts. "There's a difference between fear and caution," Mark countered. "Getting lost in here wouldn't be fun. We need to be smart," says the one who dragged us here in the first place. John retorted. Mark sighed, his exasperation evident. "Look, I just wanted a bit of spooky fun, some adventure. Can't we lighten up?" Their bickering was abruptly cut short by a scurrying sound. In the blink of an eye, Mark fell silent, Kelsey shrieked, and Heather jumped, more startled by the scream than whatever had scurried past. A tense silence followed, broken only by nervous laughter bubbling up from each of them. The adrenaline rush from the unknown, the mix of fear and exhilaration, it was unlike anything Heather had ever experienced. A slow understanding dawned on her. Perhaps this was the kind of excitement Mark had envisioned for them all along. Kelsey sheepishly apologized for her scream, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "Don't worry about it," Mark reassured her with a grin. "All part of the spooky fun. A little scare is to be expected, but ultimately there's nothing to be truly afraid of." The incident seemed to lighten the mood. Heather found herself genuinely enjoying their exploration with the group. Sure, there were creepy mannequins and unsettling decorations, but nothing that sent shivers down her spine. Kelsey's jump scares were more entertaining than genuinely frightening. John, ever the prankster, couldn't resist taking a jab at Kelsey. He let out a blood-curdling yell as they exited the house, sending her scrambling in mock terror. "You jerk, Mathers." Kelsey swatted him playfully, using his last name in mock annoyance. Heather and Kelvin chuckled, clearly enjoying the camaraderie and John's playful torment of Kelsey. Suddenly, Mark's voice cut through the air, laced with concern. "That's strange. The back gate is wide open, not how I left it." John shrugged. "Wind must have blown it open, or maybe one of us forgot to latch it." "No biggie, let's just get out of here." Kelsey echoed his sentiment, eager to leave. They exited through the back gate and found themselves on the deserted street. The quiet wasn't unusual given the house's remote location, but tonight it felt unsettlingly oppressive. "Is it just me, or are there fewer streetlights than before?" Mark questioned, voicing Heather's growing unease. She cast a glance around, her memory confirming his observation. The once illuminated path was now shrouded in an unnatural darkness. "Let's just pick up the pace, okay?" Heather urged, a tremor in her voice. The wind seemed to pick up in response, howling through the deserted streets with an eerie intensity. With every step, a sense of foreboding tightened its grip on her. The wind's mournful song morphed into unsettling whispers, or perhaps it was just her imagination playing tricks. One moment it seemed to murmur secrets, the next it carried a darker, more menacing tone. Heather envisioned a reunion, a desperate escape together. But as she burst into a clearing, a wave of crushing disappointment washed over her. Kelsey stood alone, face streaked with tears, her frantic cries echoing unanswered. No Mark, no John. Disappointment morphed into a cold dread. Perhaps they'd written Kelsey off, decided she was a goner. Maybe in their shoes, Heather would have done the same. But the thought of abandoning Kelsey, of leaving her friend to that horrifying fate, filled Heather with a fierce resolve. Saving herself seemed impossible, but saving Kelsey, that was a fight she had to take. Relief washed over Kelsey's face as she spotted Heather. "Thank God, you're alive. We have to get out of here, they're coming." Heather gripped her friend's arm, panic clawing at her throat. "Where are we going?" she gasped. Her plan, flimsy as it was, relied on finding Mark and John. They knew the way back, but before they could formulate a new one, a horrifying creature lunged at them. Did these things never tire? "Run!" Heather screamed, dragging Kelsey along. Kelsey, however, stumbled, fatigue hindering her movements. "Come on, Kelsey, keep up." Heather pleaded, only to be silenced by a horrifying spectacle. One clean swipe with an invisible weapon, and Kelsey was cleaved in two, collapsing in a spray of blood. A guttural snarl ripped from the creature's maw as it advanced on Heather, its eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. But just as despair threatened to consume her, a figure emerged from the shadows, John, wielding a massive tree branch. He slammed it into the creature's face, momentarily staggering the beast. Mark materialized beside him, a makeshift weapon clutched in his hand. "This way," he yelled, grabbing Heather's hand and pulling her forward. Barely phased it, John grunted, frustration lacing his voice. Heather, speechless with shock, could only manage a whispered question as they fled. You came back for me?" Mark, his voice breathless, offered an explanation. "Technically, we came for Kelsey. We figured you'd be together. But listen, we need to reach the haunted house. Somehow, we've entered an alternate reality, a haunted one. This town is teeming with those things." Heather's guilt gnawed at her. "I never meant to drag you into this. Who could have predicted this nightmare?" Mark pressed on, urgency lacing his words. "The way out might be the way in. If we return to the house and leave again, maybe the spell, or whatever twisted magic this is, will break. We all felt a shift when we entered, right? That's my hope. Besides, we're out of options. This town seems deserted. Maybe they're all ready." He trailed off, the implication heavy. "You know the way back?" John rasped. Mark nodded grimly. "Yeah." John surveyed the desolate street. "Those things are slow, thankfully, but strong. Our attacks barely fazed them. Driven by adrenaline and terror, they sprinted towards the looming silhouette of the haunted house. They burst through a back entrance and raced for the window they'd escaped through earlier. "Ladies first," Mark gestured, his voice strained. "No, you go," Heather countered. John's patience snapped. "Enough. This isn't the time for niceties." He scrambled through the window, his voice echoing back, "Don't waste time arguing. Monsters are on our heels." Mark ushered Heather forward. As she clambered onto the windowsill, the wind howled, carrying the chilling sounds of pursuit. Were those things eliminating everyone in this twisted reality? Or was panic clouding her judgment? "This is all my fault," Heather choked out, tears blurring her vision. "You have to go first, Mark. I couldn't live with myself if it..." Mark cut her off, his voice tight. "Don't argue. Go." Overcome with guilt and terror, Heather scrambled through the window. A sickening crunch and Mark's strangled cry froze her blood. She dared not look back, her body propelled forward by blind panic. Claws dug into her leg, searing pain jolting her. Almost through, she felt a desperate shove from behind. "Go, Heather!" Mark's scream ripped through the night. She twisted, a glimpse of Mark grappling with the monstrous figures before they swarmed him. A horrifying shriek, then silence. Heather's scream echoed in the empty house as she collapsed onto the floor, the world tilting on its axis. John rushed to her side, his face etched with a mixture of grief and fury. "What happened? Where's Mark?" His voice bounced off the walls, unanswered. Heather could only stare numbly at the window, a hollow ache spreading through her chest. No monstrous shapes lurked outside. The house, once a vessel of playful terror, now felt like a tomb. Mark's last words echoed in her mind, a desperate plea that confirmed his theory. They were back in their reality. But at what cost? Grief choked John's voice as he roared, a primal scream laced with blame. Heather, spent and broken, could only whimper, a stark counterpoint to his rage. The haunted house, once a place of amusement, now held the echoes of their worst nightmare. Kelsey, who had been uncharacteristically quiet for a while, finally broke the silence. "I really don't want to be here anymore. Can we please go home?" John's sharp question halted them in their tracks. "Wait, who are they?" His voice cut through the tension as they all pivoted towards the source of his alarm. In the distance, shrouded in the unnatural darkness, stood 7 figures. The figures were too far away to discern any details, but their presence sent a jolt of fear through Heather. "Hey, what's the big deal?" Kelvin called out, oblivious to the tension gripping the others. "Relax, guys." Mark shot him a worried look. "Kelvin, this isn't a joke. Things have gotten strange since we left the house. We should His voice was cut short by Kelvin's sudden movement. He turned back, a confused frown etched on his face, just as one of the figures wound up for a throw. "Run!" Kelsey shrieked. "They're going to attack." "Don't be ridiculous," Kelvin scoffed, ever the skeptic. "They're probably just messing with us." But his nonchalance evaporated as the remaining figures mimicked the first, their throws devoid of any object. John, his bravado finally cracking, yelled, "We're not scared of you, jerks." Kelvin began, but his sentence died in his throat. In a horrifying display of violence, his head erupted in a spray of crimson as if an invisible spear had pierced it. Blood splattered across the faces of his horrified friends. Kelsey's scream tore through the night. Heather, frozen in shock, watched the scene unfold in slow motion. Her mind struggled to comprehend the grotesque tableau before her. John's voice, laced with terror, echoed, "What the hell? A metal spear? But I can't see anything." Mark, his face etched with grim determination, grabbed Heather's arm. "It doesn't matter what it is," he rasped. "We need to get out of here. Now. This isn't normal. Get Kelsey, I have Heather." Heather felt herself being dragged along, her legs numb with terror. The attackers wound up again, their silent throes a chilling harbinger of further violence. The world seemed to shrink, the sounds of her friends' screams and the stranger's guttural voices fading into a distant hum. All she could hear was the frantic pounding of her heart and the ragged gasps escaping her constricted throat. Panic constricted her lungs, making every breath a struggle. With a desperate effort, Heather forced her gaze to flit across the scene, the lifeless body, her terrified friends, the relentless attackers. A surge of primal fear jolted her back to reality. She knew they wouldn't stop. If she didn't act, they would all be next. Heather forced her breaths to slow, the world sharpening around her. The attackers hurled their invisible weapons, thankfully missing. The thuds of impact confirmed their formless nature. "Where in God's name are we?" John rasped, dragging a whimpering Kelsey behind him. A flicker of guilt crossed his face as he glanced back at Kelvin's crumpled form. They'd had no choice. They plunged into the bushes, the dense foliage offering more protection than the deserted streets. Alternate dimension? Aliens? Silence. Mark hissed, his voice tight with urgency. "We don't know who those things were, but we need to vanish." They pushed deeper into the woods, lungs burning, until the sounds of pursuit faded. Heather remained silent, a tremor running through her. Though her breathing had eased, a knot of terror remained lodged in her throat. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Heather!" Mark's voice broke through the haze. He cupped her face, concern etching lines on his forehead. "Are you all right?" Heather's mind reeled, struggling to grasp the brutal reality. "Kelvin!" Her voice choked on a sob, a cheese. Mark met her gaze, his voice steady. "Look at me, Heather. We need to breathe. Slow, deep breaths, just like this." He demonstrated, and slowly a semblance of calm seeped back into her. The constricting grip on her throat loosened, allowing her to speak. "Kelvin, he's dead," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Confusion and terror warred within Kelsey. "What's happening? Where are we?" she stammered, her voice laced with panic. John hissed back, a dark edge to his voice. "Shut up, Kelsey. You trying to get us all killed?" Mark, ever the voice of reason, interjected. "Hey," yelling at her won't help. "Running isn't the answer either. We need a plan." "A freaking plan for what?" John shot back, frustration, and fear bubbling over. Where the hell are we supposed to run to? Mark, his brow furrowed in concentration, spoke in a low voice. This all started after we left the abandoned house. Maybe if we... His sentence was cut short as John, fueled by grief and rage, lashed out. With a sickening thud, John's fist connected with Mark's jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground. Heather gasped, the sound lost in the rising tide of John's fury. "So it's your fault, huh, Mark?" he roared. "You dragged us into this mess. You got Kelvin killed." Heather, her voice trembling, tried to reason with him. "John, what are you doing?" Mark, regaining his composure, spoke quickly. "First, John, shut up. We don't know if those things are still out there, and they could be close. We need to conserve our energy for another run. Second, they're not human. They can make things invisible, and we couldn't even see their features. And third, you really think I would have dragged you all here if I knew this would happen? We need to focus on getting out of this alive before." But John, consumed by grief and rage, charged at Mark, intent on another blow. "John, stop!" Heather cried, throwing herself between them. Suddenly, a new wave of terror ripped through the group. Kelsey's scream pierced the night, her arm outstretched, pointing into the darkness. They followed her gaze to see a horrifying sight, the 7 monstrous figures, like shadows come to life, charging towards them. This wasn't just a nightmare anymore, it was a real-life horror show. Mark's desperate yell, "Oh God, everyone run. Back to the house, I have a plan," echoed through the night. Heather didn't hesitate. Though lost in the maze of deserted streets, she sprinted after Mark, fueled by adrenaline and blind terror. John, a blur of anger and fear, shot past her. The sound of Kelsey's screams clawed at her sanity, proof she wasn't alone. But another sound chilled her, a menacing howl that seemed to ride the wind. Those things, they were after them. Heather hadn't gotten a clear look, but she knew they weren't human. Humanoid shapes, yes, but devoid of humanity. Were they the Walking Dead? No, they'd thrown spears? Invisible spears. A grotesque combination of the living and dead, radiating a chilling aura that fueled her frantic escape. Her worst fear materialized: separation. One wrong turn and she'd lost sight of the others. Paths were non-existent, so she plunged into the undergrowth, branches scraping at her skin, thorns tearing at her clothes. A choked sob threatened to escape, but she bit her lip, forcing silence. Scream and attract them? No way. No man's land lived up to its name. Lost, alone, and consumed by dread, Heather stumbled deeper into the desolate wilderness. Panic gnawed at her. Mark and John were gone, swallowed by the darkness. A strangled sob escaped her lips. What if they were searching for her only to face those monstrous attackers? Despair threatened to overwhelm her, but a flicker of hope remained. Kelsey's screams. The piercing shrieks served as a beacon, a morbid compass pointing towards her friend and likely their pursuers. Heather steeled herself. A plan, flimsy but desperate, flickered into existence. "There you are," she yelled, forcing a note of cheer into her voice. Ignoring the throbbing pain in her scratched legs, she sprinted towards the sound. Kelsey's screams grew louder, laced with terror.
Have you ever wondered if the past can come back to haunt you, not just in your memories, but in a way you never imagined? 8 years ago, my life was turned upside down. A terrifying accident, a chilling discovery, and the disappearance of my little sister, all intertwined in a way I still can't explain. Join me as I delve into the events that shattered my world. We'll explore the chilling encounters, the unanswered questions, and the terrifying possibility that the darkness I thought I left behind may have found a new way to take hold. This is a story of fear, of family, and of the secrets we keep hidden even from ourselves. So buckle up, hit that subscribe button, and get ready for a journey into the unknown. We'll be uncovering the truth, one terrifying memory at a time.
They lied. Everyone said it was an accident. A mantra repeated until it blurred the edges of my 5-year-old memory. But I see it clear as day. My small hands weren't fumbling. They gripped the wheel with cold intent. I knew, maybe that's why they were so desperate for me to forget, to shield me from the monstrous weight of guilt. But forgetting feels hollow. It's the sharp edges of memory that keep me tethered to something real. The scratch of his calloused hands when he yanked me inside. The chilling blue of his eyes, a predator's gaze. The glint of the knife, the fetid stench that clung to him like a shroud. He called me Little Love, his voice dripping with a sickening sweetness. Later, I learned the horrifying truth, what he'd done to others before me. He didn't just take them, he devoured them. The escape wasn't graceful. 1,000 hushed apologies later, I knew. A cop, a stroke of absurd luck, spotted the commotion across the street. Sirens wailed as I wrestled for control, a desperate gamble against a growing darkness. I lived, a survivor stained by the cost. No roadmap for the aftermath. Years have scabbed over the wound, a fragile normalcy. Why me? A question buried with the past. My parents, a silent echo of what if. New beginnings in a new town, a fresh canvas. Then, a miracle. My sister, a smaller me with the same wide eyes and smile. An unexpected well of patience bloomed within me. She was sunshine personified, blissfully unaware of the shadow clinging to me. And we vowed to keep it that way. No burden for her innocent heart. The facade held, a fragile piece, a carefully constructed normalcy. We were happy, or at least content. Then, the screech of tires shattering the illusion. A red light, a fender bender, a jolt back to reality. Thankfully, no serious injuries, just shaken hearts and crumpled metal. But the accident ripped open a buried wound. The man hadn't been mentioned in years. His name a taboo whispered only in nightmares. We buried him deep, for Kimberly's sake. My parents clung to the delusion of her innocence, a shield they desperately needed. I never told them the truth. The way she started slipping into my bed at night after the crash. It became routine. The creak of the door, a familiar weight settling behind me. I'd mumble a sleepy greeting, the mattress dipping a comforting inch. Fuzzy memories blur together, most nights lost in a haze of half-sleep. But one night, the warmth, the security, it all shattered with a single, chilling whisper in the darkness. Kimberly's voice, a whisper in the darkness, sliced through the carefully constructed calm. Do you remember the car accident? I plastered a smile on my face, a practiced response to her frequent questions. Of course, silly. It was just a few days ago. But her reply shattered the facade. No, not that one, she insisted, her voice barely a murmur. That other time. My heart hammered against my ribs. I feigned disinterest, muttering, "What other time?" My voice sounded hollow in the quiet room. That other time, she whined, her childish voice laced with something deeper. The time I was hurt. A lie slipped past my lips. We weren't hurt, Kimberly. Denial felt heavy on my tongue. She burrowed deeper into me, her small body a stark contrast to the chilling weight in my gut. "You weren't," she mumbled. "But I was." I spun around, the bed creaking in protest. Her form barely stirred, but a sleepy smile played on her lips. Sleep claimed her quickly, leaving me wide awake with a terrifying truth. How could she know? The possibilities unfurled like a horrifying tapestry. Did she overhear my parents? Talk in my sleep? Or was there something more unthinkable? Logic screamed, childish ramblings. A comforting mantra I desperately clung to, yet the cold dread refused to loosen its icy grip. Forcing myself to breathe, I closed my eyes, but sleep was a distant dream that night. The weight of her words, heavier than any nightmare, pressed down on me, demanding answers I couldn't face. Daylight mocked my fear. I buried myself in chores, shoving the encounter into the recesses of my mind. By nightfall, a treacherous calm had settled. The air hung heavy, the silence broken only by my own ragged breaths. Sleep beckoned, its hold almost absolute when the dreaded creak pierced the quiet. Habit took over. My hand reached back, patting the mattress. "Come on." Then I mumbled, voice thick with exhaustion. A single, chilling sentence shattered the facade. "Hello, little love." Ice clawed at my insides. It was a whisper, yet it echoed through the room, mimicking a voice I thought I had buried with the past. A voice I hadn't realized I remembered. A voice that sent a jolt of terror through me. I scrambled upright, the bedside lamp a beacon in the suffocating darkness. Her tiny silhouette stood in the doorway, a wide, unsettling grin plastered on her face. It took an eternity to force out the words, "What did you just call me?" Silence. An unervingly blank stare met mine. My voice cracked, a desperate scream of her name morphing into a choked sob. She remained motionless, blinking rapidly before lumbering towards the bed. Her movements were clumsy, unnatural. Terror rooted me to the spot as she climbed in, her small form heavy with an unknown weight. Finally, a small hand reached out, a slap more like a caress. "Light," she mumbled, her voice devoid of its usual childish chirp. My hand moved on autopilot, plunging the room back into darkness. We were swallowed by the shadows. A suffocating presence nestled against me. The weight of her words a chilling reminder of the nightmare that refused to end. Breakfast was a silent war zone. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the newspaper, sent shivers down my spine. The memory of that whisper, a ghostly echo of a voice I'd buried alive, clung to me like a shroud. My parents, lost in their own unspoken anxieties, wouldn't understand. They had their secrets. Silence was our dysfunctional family currency. Kimberly, however, couldn't ignore the growing tension. Her usual chatter was replaced by a heavy silence. Her small shoulders hunched as she stared listlessly at her cereal. A wave of guilt washed over me. None of this was her fault. To distract her, I suggested a detour through the park on our walk to school. The park, with its vibrant flowers, was her happy place. Maybe a dose of sunshine could chase away these dark shadows. Her face lit up at the mention of the park. Relief flooded me, a small victory against the encroaching dread. She darted upstairs to grab her bag, while I lingered in the kitchen, rinsing dishes. A moment later, her voice, uncharacteristically serious, echoed from the doorway. I didn't turn, assuming she was waiting for me to finish. "I won't ever chew on your bones. I promise." The chilling words echoed in the kitchen as I spun around, water cascading from the sink. Her face, devoid of its usual childish innocence, held an unsettling calmness that mirrored my racing heart. Without a word, she vanished, leaving me drowning in a sea of unease. That afternoon, logic battled dread. It was just a kid's babble, right? Yet, each unsettling echo of the past, each bizarre utterance, hammered at the edges of my sanity. Did she truly understand what she was saying? Or was there a deeper, more horrifying truth lurking beneath the surface? The school bell's shrill cry tore me from my thoughts. As I waited, a knot of apprehension tightened in my gut. Then, a ray of sunshine. Kimberly, a whirlwind of strawberry shampoo and frantic joy, launched herself into my arms. Relief washed over me, momentarily pushing the darkness aside. I held her a little too long, savoring the warmth and innocence. A fleeting thought pierced my joy. How long before these hugs become unwelcome? Before the darkness she brushed against seeped fully into her world? With a shaky smile, I took her bag, the weight a grounding force against the tide of fear threatening to consume me. The familiar walk home was punctuated by Kimberly's chatter, a constant stream of schoolyard stories and proudly displayed drawings. I feigned interest, the weight of her words unspoken pressing down on me. She name-dropped classmates I didn't recognize, weaving tales from a past I couldn't access. Tuning out became a practiced art. Dozens of figures huddled at the crosswalk, waiting for the light. My parents' ingrained rule echoed in my head. Hold hands when crossing. Reaching blindly for Kimberly, my blood ran cold. The hand that grasped mine wasn't small and soft. It was large, rough, a grip like sandpaper. A man's hand. Panic surged. I yanked back, scanning the crowd for the source of the touch. No one seemed close enough, no one old enough. My gaze darted to Kimberly, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Daddy said hold my hand," she declared. "I know, sweetie." I forced a smile, the taste of fear metallic on my tongue. She puffed out her lower lip, tiny fists clenched. "Why'd you let go?" The light changed. The throng lurched forward. Desperation clawed at me. I settled for guiding her across, a hand on the back of her head. Her protests echoed across the street. "No hand! No hand!" Those weren't the words of a playful child. They were a chilling echo. A whispered promise sent shivers down my spine. The slam of my bedroom door echoed through the house. A flimsy barrier against the dread coiled in my gut. Kimberly's whines and accusations of being mean were a dull buzz behind the locked door. Time stretched, a suffocating cloak, as I tried to catch my breath. The memory of the hand at the crosswalk replayed on a loop in my mind, each iteration etching the horror deeper. How could I explain it? My parents, burdened by their own unspoken anxieties, wouldn't understand. Every attempt to articulate the events felt like buffing a tarnished mirror, the truth glinting back at me with a horrifying clarity. Dinner was a battlefield of forced smiles and stolen glances. Kimberly's gaze, once filled with childish trust, was now an unreadable puzzle, amplifying my unease. The moment permission was granted, I bolted back to my sanctuary. "No bed with you tonight," I blurted to Kimberly, the words scraping against my throat. Her protests, a torrent of tears and accusations, washed over me. Guilt gnawed at me, turning me into the villain of her innocent world. Yet, with each whimper, the memory of the rough hand, the chilling echo of words, slammed back. Sleep, a distant dream, mocked me from the darkness. Hours bled into one another, the silence broken only by the ragged gasps of my own fear. A jolt ripped me from sleep. No sound, no touch, just a primal awareness that sent me bolting upright. Kimberly stood inches from my face, bathed in the oppressive shadows of my room. Her large eyes, usually sparkling with childish curiosity, were now black voids, unblinking and emotionless. My breath caught in my throat as I stared back, muscles locked in terror. "Kimberly," my voice rasped, shattering the suffocating silence. No response. The stillness stretched, a living entity pressing down on me. I noticed then that her small hands were clasped tightly behind her back. "Kimberly," I tried again, forcing a sternness that felt hollow. "What are you hiding?" A flicker of movement, a shift of her tiny body. "Nothing," she chirped, her voice a sickeningly sweet melody in the darkness. I didn't believe her. Every fiber of my being screamed danger. "Show me," I demanded, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. A slow, unsettling smile spread across her face, a stark contrast to the emptiness in her eyes. A sliver of moonlight sliced through the gloom, catching the glint of metal. In that split second, the bed lurched beneath me. A choked gasp escaped my lips. Was she?
No.
Kimberly hadn't moved. Yet, there, embedded inches from my head, a 6-inch kitchen knife protruded from the mattress. The force required to lodge it there was undeniable. Panic surged through me, cold and suffocating. Kimberly stood there, a silent sentinel bathed in darkness. As I reached for the light switch, her horrifying act the only explanation for the chilling weight pressing down on my chest. The scream still echoes in my mind, a ragged tear in the fabric of memory. My parents, a blur of frantic movement, flooded my room, but the details after that fade, dissolve into a hazy nightmare. Kimberly's empty bed, the gaping maw of the open front door, a chilling tableau etched into my soul. 8 years have crawled by, each one a monument to my unanswered questions. What did I see that night? Was Kimberly haunted by the shadow from my past? The man who had tried to take everything? Did he return, reborn in her innocent form, to finish what he started? Did she run, fleeing some monstrous truth I couldn't face? Or was it a twisted reflection of my own fear, a primal scream from my subconscious that I mistook for a threat to her? The answer remains buried, a seed of dread blossoming in my gut. Every sunrise brings a flicker of hope for her return, a prayer on my lips. But with each passing night, a darker terror creeps in. For what if she does come back? And what if, this time, the darkness that clung to her isn't a figment of my fear, but something far more sinister? They say the scariest stories are the ones that could happen, the ones that lurk just at the edges of our reality, waiting to pull us in. This is Eerie Encounters, where we delve into the darkest corners of the human psyche and explore the things that go bump in the night. Tonight's story will take you to a place where childhood fears become horrifying realities. So, grab a blanket, turn off the lights, and hold on tight, because what you're about to hear might just keep you awake at night. The night Mom left is etched in my memory. Her absence followed the crack of my father's voice, his eyes glowing a feverish red. A humorless smile stretched across his face, flecked with spittle from his tirade. The worst part, though, was the familiar glint of the belt, raised high like a twisted conductor's baton. The searing pain on my bare arms, the leather's sting, would forever be branded into my mind. Mom had always been our shield, deflecting the storm that was Dad's temper. A single misstep, a childish prank, could unleash his fury. But Mom, with the farm, 100 sprawling acres inherited from her father, hanging in the balance, could always quell the impending explosion. Looking back, I realize I exploited this power more than Alice. My parents' love had long withered, eliminating any chance of him siding with her. The tipping point in their 20-year marriage remained a mystery, but for 13-year-old me, it meant a free pass. Mom was my escape clause, and I abused it. 3 weeks past my birthday, her resilience finally shattered. I can still see her last night, a glass of iced tea, laced with something stronger, I knew, clutched in her hand, a silent farewell painted on her weary face. Off to bed, Garfield. Mom teased, poking my belly. The nickname, a constant reminder of my childhood chubbiness, usually earned a grumble. But that night, an unfamiliar silence replaced it. Maybe, I think now, with a pang of regret, I should have stayed. Maybe a conversation, a hug on the porch swing, could have changed everything. The next morning, the silence was deafening. Mom was gone. Dad's explanation, a bitter cocktail of blame and resentment towards women, offered no comfort. Alice, shrouded in grief, retreated within herself. The house, once filled with the murmur of daily life, felt suffocatingly empty. Dinner burned, the smoke a physical manifestation of the fractured family. When Dad's anger ignited, a primal urge to protect Alice surged through me. But intervening was futile, the blows a horrifying echo of the one I'd received weeks earlier. Each thud felt like a punishment for my past apathy, a brutal reminder of the void Mom left behind. In the lonely weeks that followed, a darkness settled within me. Sometimes the thought flickers, a twisted wish that the violence had ended it all, for both of us. A week later, the scarecrow arrived. It wasn't a literal scarecrow, of course, but the vacant shell of my father. Gone was the man who used to yell, replaced by a brooding figure who drank himself into oblivion each night. The days blurred together, a monotonous tapestry of fear and exhaustion. The only marker of time became the absence of the sun, a brief reprieve from my father's drunken rage. He'd become a tyrant, a hair trigger waiting to explode. The slightest misstep, a misplaced plate, a forgotten chore, could ignite an inferno of fury. Beatings became a nightly ritual, his drunken shouts echoing through the house. Sleep was a luxury, replaced by nights spent huddled under the covers. The rhythmic pounding of my father's footsteps, a constant drumbeat of terror. Sunrise offered no solace, merely a reminder that I'd somehow endured another night. But the true victim, I realized with a sickening dread, was Alice. Thrust into the role my mother once held, she faced the brunt of his fury. The farm's leverage was gone, replaced by a barrage of physical abuse. The nights were a symphony of horror, Alice's muffled cries punctuated by the sickening thwack of my father's hand. Each agonizing minute stretched into eternity, leaving scars deeper than any physical wound. Even now, years later, those sounds echo in my nightmares, a constant reminder of my powerlessness. The scarecrow was a monstrous sentinel, its arrival the only break in the relentless terror. A grotesque mockery of a human, it loomed over the cornfields, a constant reminder of the desolation within our home. My father, a ghost of his former self, had erected it, a chilling testament to his unraveling. The first glimpse of it sent a jolt of primal fear through me. 50 yards away, it stood crucified, its hay-stuffed form draped in the tattered remnants of my mother's life. A Sunday hat, a familiar sweater. Illogically, I felt its gaze fixed on me. A chilling smile drawn with a cruel black marker. Reason offered no solace. My adolescent mind, already teetering on the edge, spun a horrifying narrative. In the dead of night, whispers drifted from the scarecrow. "Come closer, Garfield." A voice rasped in my head, a twisted echo of my father's drunken taunts. Secrets, boy. Secrets about Alice's screams. Not beatings, no. Something far worse. The scarecrow became a physical manifestation of my terror, its taunts blending with the symphony of nightmares that plagued my sleep. Venturing outside became an impossibility. The scarecrow stood guard, a constant reminder of the darkness that had consumed our lives. The nightmares started blurring with reality. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when, but it coincided with Alice's trip to the hospital. My once vibrant sister became a ghost, her movements mechanical, her eyes vacant. Chores were completed on autopilot, conversations met with an empty stare. Whatever spark remained of Alice, the one who used to laugh and fight back, was locked away, a prisoner beyond my father's reach. It was like watching a walking corpse, her pain a constant ache in my chest. The catalyst for the next beating was mundane laundry. $300, forgotten in a pocket, became a crimson stain on my father's rage. This time, the violence escalated with terrifying speed. Alice, seemingly numb to the blows, endured the slaps, punches, and kicks in chilling silence. Her lack of reaction fueled his fury, each strike a desperate attempt to break the shell she'd built around herself. It was a horrifying display of power, a glimpse into the abyss my father had become. The world lurched to a sickening stop. My father grabbed Alice, his grip tightening around her head before slamming her face into the wall. Blood erupted from her broken nose, a crimson stain blooming on her white blouse. The sight triggered a primal scream within me, drowned out by Alice's ragged gasps for air. In that horrific silence, something inside my father snapped. Urgent and panicked, he fumbled for his coat, barking threats at me to stay put. Moments later, their car roared away, swallowed by the approaching twilight. Alone on the porch, the wind whipping at my face, a thought, long simmering, flared into a desperate resolve. Escape. The beatings, the fear, the suffocating silence. I couldn't take another moment. The thought of my father returning, his fury amplified, sent a tremor through me. But this time, he'd be at the hospital, scrambling for explanations. A window, a chance. My hidden stash, meager as it was, felt like a lifeline. Enough for a one-way ticket, anywhere. The destination was secondary. All that mattered was leaving this nightmare behind. Forever. The house echoed with an eerie silence, broken only by the creak of floorboards under my hurried steps. Dim, flickering bulbs cast long, distorted shadows that danced on the walls. The familiar space now felt ominous, a cage I desperately needed to escape. But a chilling thought snagged at my resolve. Alice, what would become of her if I fled? The image of her bloodied face, the fear in her vacant eyes, flickered in my mind. My hand hovered over the hidden stash of cash under my science book, enough for a one-way ticket to freedom. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the window panes. I slammed it shut, a futile attempt to silence the storm brewing inside me. Trapped. The thought of the police crossed my mind, but reason scoffed. My father was no fool. he'd weasel his way out. Every escape route seemed to dead end in frustration. Reaching for the desk, I glanced out the window towards the cornfield. A cold dread washed over me. The scarecrow, no longer a stoic sentinel, it hung crookedly, its hollow gaze fixed directly on my window. The black marker smile stretched wider, as if mocking my predicament. Escape seemed impossible, not from the house, but from the ever-present eyes of fear. Sleep eluded me that night. I huddled beneath the bed, the floorboards groaning with every creak of the house settling. The distant rumble of my father's truck returning offered no comfort. The sound of Alice's footsteps, light and hesitant, ascending the stairs was a stark reminder of her vulnerability. Exhaustion finally claimed me, but it was a fragile sleep, easily shattered. My father's pounding fist on my door jolted me awake. He burst in, a whirlwind of rage. Before I could react, he yanked me from under the bed. "Did you touch it?" he roared, his voice thick with a fear he couldn't mask. "You useless little worm! Did you move it?" His grip on my shoulders was a vice, shaking me until my vision blurred. Words scrambled in my throat, choked by the terror. He manhandled me downstairs, his rage a tangible presence. The backyard loomed, and with a growing sense of dread, I saw it. The scarecrow, eerily upright now, its black marker grin seemed wider, more mocking than ever. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Carry it!" my father bellowed, shoving the scarecrow towards me. "Think you're clever, huh? You'll carry it back to the field, or I swear to God." His threat hung in the air, heavy and malevolent. Those 20 minutes were an eternity. Each step with the cumbersome scarecrow felt like a descent into madness. The scratch of straw against my skin, the imagined weight of its hollow gaze, they were all instruments of torture. By the time I reached the field, I was drenched in sweat, my body trembling with a mix of exertion and terror. Splinters dug into my palms as my father yanked at the scarecrow's stake, forcing me to rip it free with my bare hands. I squeezed my eyes shut. The grotesque image of its black smile burned into my eyelids. The thing, surprisingly heavy, felt like a dead weight on my back, a mockery of a human form. Sweat beaded on my forehead as the relentless sun beat down. Each labored step was punctuated by my father's barked insults. The scratch of hay against my skin sent shivers down my spine. Every rustle of the corn leaves sounded like a whisper, a rasping breath. The scarecrow, a monstrous figment of my fear or something more, seemed to breathe down my neck. Its painted grin taunted me, and in a delirious haze, I envisioned its straw limbs twitching, straining against the ropes that bound them. A strangled cry escaped my lips as the image of strangling hands materialized in my mind. The beating that followed was a blur. My father's face contorted in rage, mirroring the scarecrow's horrifying smile in my warped perception. Every burning welt felt like the scarecrow's cruel laughter echoing on my skin. By the time it was over, I was left a sobbing mess, the line between reality and my terrifying delusion hopelessly blurred. Alice remained a ghost in her room, the silence broken only by the creak of floorboards as I took over her chores. A newfound respect, laced with a bitter pang of guilt, bloomed within me. Every dish scrubbed, every weed pulled, was a testament to her strength, a strength I was failing to replicate. My father's ever-present shadow loomed large. His slaps, though painful, felt insignificant compared to the gnawing dread that coiled in my gut. The memory of the scarecrow, Its mocking grin, a constant image, burned into my mind, eclipsed any fear my father could instill. The house, once familiar, now felt like a suffocating cage, its walls steadily closing in. At night, strangled sobs from Alice's room pierced the silence. Guilt gnawed at me, a helpless witness separated by a thin barrier. Was there anything I could say, any comfort I could offer, to mend the cracks in her spirit? Fear, a paralyzing force, choked the words back down. Heavy thuds echoed on the stairs, my father's ascent a grim herald of what was to come. I squeezed my eyelids shut as his footsteps retreated down the hall. A guttural growl, muffled by the wall, shattered the fragile peace. It was a symphony of violence I knew all too well, a horrific lullaby that lulled no one to sleep. Only silence, thick and heavy, marked its end. The bedroom door creaked open and shut once more, his footsteps fading into the distance. I lay there, trembling in the darkness, the echo of her muffled sobs a counterpoint to the pounding of my terrified heart. Asterisk fury, a white-hot coal, burned in my gut. Helplessness was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. With trembling hands, I raided my secret stash. The meager bills, enough for 2 tickets, offered a lifeline. Escape. With Alice by my side, we could leave this farm, this nightmare, behind. Far away, she'd heal. The spark in her eyes would return. A life rebuilt, brick by hopeful brick. A twisted compulsion drew me to the window. Logic dictated sleep, but a morbid curiosity gnawed at me. Maybe it was a prank, a cruel joke by some teenagers. The alternative was a monstrous reality I couldn't face. Inch by painstaking inch, I approached the window. The cornfield stretched out before me, the scarecrow's usual spot empty. A cold dread seeped into my bones, prickling my skin with goosebumps. My gaze darted around the backyard, finally landing on the monstrosity. The scarecrow, no longer a haunting sentinel, it lay sprawled on the back porch steps, its vacant eyes turned up towards the sky. But this time, they seemed to be fixed directly on me. A chilling welcome back to a reality far more horrifying than any nightmare. The first sliver of dawn light wasn't enough to banish the shadows completely, but it was enough for me. No more beatings, no more waiting. Silently, I crept outside, the pre-dawn chill a welcome contrast to the burning rage inside me. The scarecrow loomed, a grotesque sentinel in the muted light. With a newfound resolve, I tackled it, ignoring the scratch of straw against my skin. This time, an inexplicable heaviness seemed to cling to the thing. After a few faltering steps, I resorted to dragging it through the damp cornfield. The task felt Sisyphean, each groan of the scarecrow against the stalks a maddening taunt. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it stood upright again, mocking me with its painted smile. Morning chores blurred into a frantic routine. Breakfast was laid before my father, his usual grunt of disapproval barely registering. When I reached for a second plate for Alice, a hiss shot from him, laced with a strange urgency. "Don't," he rasped. "She needs to eat." I retorted, my voice surprisingly steady. A single, chilling glare from my father sent me back to the table, defeated. If I'd known then it was the last time his gaze would hold any power over me, perhaps things would have played out differently. 7th grade English flickers in my memory. We read a story about a grown man revisiting his childhood home, haunted by fantastical memories of playing with fairies in the attic. The twist? It was all a figment of his youthful imagination. As I recall the night my father died, A similar uncertainty plagues me. How much was real, and how much a desperate escape fabricated by my terrified mind? The day it happened began like any other, suffocating tension punctuated by my father's volatile moods. He refused to let Alice eat breakfast, a chilling display of his escalating control. Thankfully, the beatings subsided, replaced by a watchful, malevolent silence. There was a single terrifying moment in the late afternoon when I thought I'd be the target of his rage, but it passed. Relief, selfish and shameful, washed over me. Maybe, just maybe, this day wouldn't be another torment. As evening settled, I retreated to my room, a haven from the storm brewing downstairs. A fragile peace settled over me, a sliver of hope daring to peek through the cracks of my fear. Maybe, for the first time in a long time, I could actually sleep. Perhaps a ghost of a smile even touched my lips, a memory too fragile to grasp. But the night that followed, etched permanently in my mind, shattered any semblance of peace. A blood-curdling scream ripped through the night, shattering the fragile peace. Alice's voice, usually numb and silent, tore through the house like a banshee's wail. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a frantic drum solo in my chest. Fists pounded the wall above my head, the tremors shaking the very foundation of the house. A strangled cry, followed by the sickening slap of flesh against flesh, confirmed my worst fears. Terror locked me in place. I watched, or rather felt, the scene unfold through the thin barrier. Her screams echoed in my ears, a desperate plea for help I was powerless to answer. Then, a sickening thud. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence descended, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own terrified heart. The sound of the bedroom door creaking open sent a fresh wave of terror crashing over me. A shuffling sound, the rustle of sheets, followed by my father's voice, laced with confusion and a hint of fear. "What is this?" he rasped, the words thick with exertion. "Some kind of joke?" A new voice filled the air, cold and unfamiliar. "How did you get inside my house?" It spoke. An inexplicable dread crawled up my spine. Ignoring the cold sweat clinging to my skin, I bolted towards the window. The cornfields were shrouded in an unnatural fog, thick and swirling. A primal certainty clenched my gut. The scarecrow was gone. A blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. It was my father's voice, a grotesque parody of human sound, laced with a terror I'd never witnessed in him. My gaze darted from the empty crucifix to the source of the horrifying shrieks. Through the swirling fog, I glimpsed a dark, thrashing form in the distance. The screams devolved into gurgling gasps, punctuated by a sickening snap. Then silence. A heavy thud echoed in the night, followed by an unsettling stillness. The sound of Alice's bedroom door creaking open ripped me from my frozen state. Soft footsteps, tentative at first, then purposeful, approached my room. I couldn't tear my eyes from the window, my body a statue locked in terror. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. In the window's reflection, I saw the doorknob turn slowly. Then the door creaked open. A hulking figure filled the doorway, the scarecrow. But something was terribly wrong. Its straw form seemed damp and misshapen, the hay sticking unnaturally to its frame. I held my breath, praying invisibility. My mind raced with horrifying images of what might have transpired downstairs. My gaze locked onto the empty eye sockets of the scarecrow reflected in the window. And then, for a fleeting moment, I swear I saw a flicker of movement within those hollow depths. The scarecrow's head tilted, the brim of its hat casting a long shadow that concealed most of its face. Yet, a stray strand of golden hair, matted with mud, peeked out from beneath the straw. The scarecrow spoke. Its voice, a rasping whisper as if choked by dirt, sent shivers down my spine. Yet, there was a familiarity in its tone, a horrifying recognition that clawed its way through my terror. "Go to sleep, Garfield," it rasped. "He won't hurt you anymore. They found me in the cornfield, a broken husk of the boy I used to be. The doctors called it a stress disorder, a polite way of saying my mind had shattered to cope with the unspeakable. Years bled into one another before I could speak again, before I could face the truth. They kept me safe, isolated from the world that had turned so horrifying. Only when I could whisper, then stammer a response, did I learn of the aftermath. Alice, my sister, my confidant, silenced forever. The doctors spoke of organ failure, a merciful escape from the brutality she'd endured. I miss her with a ferocity that claws at my insides, a constant ache alongside the guilt. Guilt for not being braver, for not trying to save her. The monster that was my father met a violent end. Stabbed, his bones shattered beyond recognition. A baseball bat, they said, the murder weapon. Ironically, a tool used for a game meant for children. My mother never left, found hanging from a makeshift scarecrow in the field, a macabre display hidden in plain sight. Weeks dead, strangled according to the report. Their questions about their final days were lost in the screams that tore from my throat. The scars run deeper than flesh. Nightmares still claw at my sanity. The medication a flimsy shield against the encroaching darkness. In the flickering light between sleep and terror, I see it. The scarecrow, watching me from the corner of my padded cell, its hollow eyes a bottomless pit. And then a raspy whisper, "Off to bed, Garfield." It's always the same. A single sentence, laced with a chilling familiarity that sends shivers down my spine even now.